The first exercise is asking to write a C# program for getting marks of 3 courses of students. So we need to enter 3 marks. And then calculate and print the total average mark of the students. For example, 3 subjects, any subject A, B, and C, and then we need to get these 3 marks for the subject, for all these courses or subjects, and then we calculate the average, we do the summation, and after that we divide them by the number of courses we have, or the number of marks, to get the average. Now in this program we need to use exception handling to check the range of the mark that we enter is strictly between 0 and 100. Actually, we don't have a predefined exception to handle this, so we have to write our own user-defined exception. Now let me open Visual Studio to write the code. So I'll create a new project here, and this one is also a council project. We are not yet reached to the creating a user interface. Okay, so we have to select a council application. We click on next, and then I will call it tab 2 exercise 1 here. I will save it also. So I'll save it. You can choose the location where you want to save it. I'll save it in this folder here, and click on next. We choose the framework, it's .NET framework. We have multiple, you choose the current one. So it will open, it will create an empty class for us, and that class is called program. Now I will define a student class. I can define inside here a student class, public class students, and that student has 3 different numbers, which is the marks here. I'll define them as double, here mark 1, double, mark 2, and double mark 3. So 3 marks, as the exercise said, 3 marks. Now I'll create a constructor for this student so that I can initialize these 3 marks. So public student, this is the same name of the class, and then just to give the values that you are trying to put here, mark 1. I'll just copy and paste just to make it easier. Mark 2 and mark 3. I will change this to mark 2 and mark 3. Open the curly braces, and then use this dot mark 1. Now, when we say this dot mark 1, we are referring to this equal to this mark 1 that will come while we are doing the initialization. Same thing we do for the other 2. We just change them to mark 2 here and mark 3 here. Now I need to define, before I do the check of the marks, I can define one method here called check marks to see whether they are between 0 and 100. Check marks. This method, I need to check all the marks that is entered, whether they are between 100 and 0. But before that, I need to define my my user-defined exception, and that exception is called, I will call it 0 to 100 exception, public class 0 to 100 exception. This one definitely will inherit from application exception. And inside it, it will have a constructor, and that constructor, same like our example here, it has a constructor, that will call the base class constructor, which is the application exception. So public, that is the constructor, 0 exception here, 0 exception, and that usually 0 exception will take a string as a message. If we want to initialize that using the base class we call base, and then we pass the message to the base class. We have to put the curly braces. So whatever message we want to put, when we call this, it will be passed here, and it will pass to the base class so that we can display them. Now, inside this check mark, I can use these exceptions. Now, if I need to check if mark one is less than 0, or this is how to put or mark one is greater than 100, then what will happen actually here? What will happen is that it will throw new 0 to 100 exception, and that one will come with a message. I need to put that message here, this message that we define here. Mark one should be, so you can define any message. Mark one should be between 0 and 100. Same thing you have to do for the other marks. Now you have to do it for mark 2, and then here mark 2, and then you have to do it for mark 3. Mark 3. Here mark 3. So we define our user-defined exception. We define the class with 3 members, and we define a constructor that we can use it to initialize these 3 marks. And we define one method to check the marks, whether they are between 0 and 100. Now, in the main method that will call this student class, what we will do is we will try to read from the console 3 different marks. So I'll put here enter the first mark. And after that, I'll try to get the mark double. Mark 1 equal. I have to convert this because when we read from the console, it will be read as string, so we have to convert to double. Whatever we will read from the console dot read line. Console.read line will make us able to enter some information inside the console, then it will convert into double and then put it here. Same thing we have to do for the other 2 marks. So same thing here. I'll repeat this 2 more times. Enter the second mark. And this one is mark 2. And enter the third mark, and this is mark 3. Now we instantiate a student, the student here, student equal new student, and then we pass these 3 marks, M1, M2, and M3. We pass them to this constructor here. Now the values here are initialized with the 3 marks that we already entered from the console. Now we can check the marks. Now we can do the check for the marks here. So we put try. We call check marks student dot check marks. In case if any one of these marks is not between 0 and 100, then we have to catch that exception, which is 0 to 100 exception. 0 to 100 exception. Sorry, not divide by 0. That is 0 to 100 exception. Same name as this one here, 0 to 100 exception. And now we can print the message that's coming from this 0 to 100. So we print the message just like in our example, 0 to 100. See what is the problem here. I'm afraid it's already defined inside this one should be outside this one. Should be outside, so it's a different class. That's why it was inside the student's class. So this is the end of the student class. Now we can define another class here. And at the end, I will put console dot, just to hold the screen, console dot read key. Now we will just enter the marks before do any calculation, before we calculate the average. We will just try to enter the marks and see whether they are okay or not. So I just execute the program here. So it's asked us here to enter the first mark. Let's say the first mark is 80, second mark is 90, and third mark is 120, for example. So it should throw exception here because the third mark is more than 100. Now let's throw the mark here for mark 3, should be between 0 and 100. That is how we check the marks here. It's called this check marks. Check the first mark, it was okay. That's why it didn't throw exception. Check the second mark, it was okay. But the third mark was more than 100. That's why it's throw this exception. And this exception was caught here. And then we print that message that we put. The message is this one. Now I can write the average. So that will be part of the students also. Another method here, public double, that one calculate average, AVG. What this method will do, is it will take sum, calculate the sum. I will initialize it to 0, and then average, I will also initialize it to 0. And it will take the sum of the marks equal mark 1 plus mark 2 plus mark 3. And it will calculate the average. Average is equal to sum divided by 3. Then will return the average, AVG. We can call this method, we can call it here actually, here. So I'll just print the value here. In case if all the marks is checked and there is no problem, then it will call that method, the average is, and I can call that method here, student dot calculate average. So it will calculate the average here, and then it will print it directly. If any one of these methods, any one of these marks is not between 0 and 100, it will catch the exception and then it will print this one. Now we can execute again. So enter the first mark, 80, enter the second mark, 90, enter the third mark, 85, for example. Then it's supposed to calculate the average and print it, but let's see why it didn't print the average. AVG here. Okay, we need to use the curly braces with zeros, and the value here will be captured. This value will be the 0 value. So I will stop and I will execute again. First mark, as we said, 90, 80, and 85. And then this is the average is 85. That is in the case of all the marks is entered correctly. Now let's try to enter one of the marks not between 0 and 100. So again, minus 10, for example, here, that is wrong actually. Then second one is 80 or 90, third one is 80. Then it should throw exception. Mark should be, this is mark 1, should be between 0 and 100. It did not execute this one because it's directly jumped to the catch to catch this error and to print the message that we already specified here. That is related, or the things related to the first example. Any question? Any question related to this before we go to the second example?
No, Mr.